What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. So, today we have one of our illustrious staff members. This is Becca. She is our media exec. She does pretty much all of like the audio and visual type stuff that we've got going on here. So we brought Becca in as a college intern about 4 years ago, and now she does all of the photography. I'd say a good, 85% of the videography. She does editing
Editing, and all of the graphic design that we need.
and social media stuff. Not all of it, but
Not all of it, but some.
a good amount of it. And she also organizes and maintains the Patreon stuff that we have. So quite a lot, quite a lot. So the podcast today, we wanted to kind of pick her brain and just kind of have like a discussion about how best to take photos and video of our tanks. I guess where to begin? Like, what are like the difficulties of taking photos and video? Because a lot of times when I look online, not to be too judgy, but a lot of photos don't turn out well.
No, it's a really weird atmosphere to be shooting in for sure. I know that the main issues that people come across when they're doing photos of a reef tank are the very artificial lighting that's getting pumped into these cameras, as well as just the fact that there's like a pane of glass in front of you. Depending on, I know that a lot of our glass, it's pretty thick. And so that can provide a lot of distortion and stuff as well. Those are the two main things that I see that are huge issues when it comes to photos, as well as the fact that, like, not a lot of people have professional photo cameras. We have what's in our pocket all the time.
Yeah,
So,
and I often see like in the discourse of cameras that when somebody's like shopping for a nice they maybe not a crazy nice camera but a pretty good camera, uh somebody will eventually just say, look, our phones these days are so advanced, they do a better job than most DSLRs and mirrorless.
hmm.
Yeah, they don't.
They don't.
They-
I know that a lot of people, they do look at the fact that I'm gonna get into like nitty gritty for a second. The fact that a lot of phone cameras have, like, I don't know, I think the iPhone 15 Pro has like a 48 megapixel sensor, and the one that I shoot on has like 50, and so people immediately look at that and be like, it's almost the same. Wrong. There's so many other factors that come into how good a sensor on a camera actually is.
Yeah, it's like the whole resolution thing as far
Right.
as like even on the video side, like 4K versus 1080. It's resolution is just the wrong metric to be looking at the quality of a camera at all. It's almost like you're rating like dishes at a restaurant just by calories alone.
Mm.
Like calories don't really tell very much of the story at all.
Hmm.
Like the a steak at your favorite steakhouse might have, I don't know, 1,500 calories. And that same amount of calories might be in like Dunkin' Donuts. It's like, it's so super different, but one costs a lot more than a donut.
Right.
Very, very, very different stuff, completely different applications.
Yeah.
One thing that I was thinking about when we were talking about challenges. So you'd mentioned like the thickness of the glass. You mentioned like the artificial light. One thing that people, I guess, like don't really know is how dim our tanks really are.
Oh, for sure.
Because all these cameras, they're really trying to capture light. And we think that because we have expensive lighting or whatever, that there's a lot of light, and there's really not. To put into perspective, like we have security cameras in the greenhouse,
Hmm.
and there's artificial lighting over all of those tanks. It is a greenhouse, so there is some light coming in during the day. And the security cameras are always in night vision mode because it's so dim.
It is really weird to think about.
Most cameras in like the professional stuff and with our phones, they're not geared towards that super blue spectrum.
No.
They're geared towards daylight because
That's
that's,
where you're going to be shooting.
yeah, that's the
That's
world.
like 99.9% of the lighting that you're going to be whipping your phone out for, you know?
Yeah. So we're kind of taxing the technology on this very niche application that's like on a physics level difficult. It's dim. Yeah, I think all of these things contribute to not the best photos I've ever seen.
Right.
Not the best. So let's think about ways that we can kind of improve on that. So, what can be done about the fact that it is dim?
Well, so just adding in light is, it seems like the easiest answer to that problem, but it's the best answer to that problem. If you like, when I shoot personally for here at Tidal Gardens, I not only have the lights coming in on the top of the tank, but I also have like a spotlight like Kessel that we've hooked up to a microphone arm that I use to just like beam the coral with a little bit of light just so I can get that photo. And when you're shooting tanks at home, a lot of people aren't going to have a Kessel mounted to a microphone arm. They also probably aren't shooting coral as close to the glass as I am. That also helps. If you're shooting corals closer to the glass, you're not having to work through like layers of water to get a photo of what you want, because that's also an issue with light, is
Hmm.
just shooting through water doesn't help. So the
Yeah.
less water you have to shoot through, the better. I guess having lights on in the room that you're shooting helps a bit. It can add to a little bit of reflections, which we'll touch on later, which could be an issue. But if you can find a way to spotlight the coral that you're shooting, I think that's your best bet.
So obviously, like the really basic answer is like find ways to straight up add more light,
Right.
and that can be challenging. If I mean, who just has extra lights lying around like that? Not too many people.
No.
So at that point, I think that we're going to have to be doing stuff like in camera. A lot of these types of features typically aren't going to be on smartphones. You have to get kind of dedicated apps for that type of stuff, but they are available on just about any halfway decent DSLR or mirrorless camera like this.
Right.
Um, so not to go super in depth, but there is kind of like the holy trinity of exposure, or like how to manage the amount of light coming in. So let's quickly kind of like go over some of these things. So it's aperture, shutter speed, and ISO.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so real quick, what is aperture?
So aperture is essentially, if you're thinking about, you know how when you walk into a room and if it's really bright, the pupil in your eye shrinks really small, and or vice versa, it gets really big to let in more light if it's really dark. That's what the aperture is. It's essentially the pupil of the camera that you can adjust to let in more or less light.
So what is shutter speed?
Shutter speed is essentially like how fast you're taking the picture. And depending on how fast you're taking the picture, is how much light is getting let in. It's just kind of like the shutter's going like this right in front of the sensor. If it's going by it really fast, you're not going to let in a lot of light. And if it's going by super slow, there's more time there for more light to come in.
Okay. So slower shutter speed equals more light.
Correct.
Okay. And then lastly, ISO.
ISO is just artificial light that you're adding to an image, essentially.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird term because ISO comes from like film world.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day when people actually used film, um, there was like different types of film that were more sensitive to light.
Right, yeah.
So if you were planning on shooting in dimmer locations and stuff, you would actually have to purchase different film.
Right. And I've shot with film before. I had to do it in college. And yeah, you don't want to have 200 ISO film, which is made for outdoors, and start shooting inside because all your stuff's going to turn out black.
Yeah. And that term just kind of got co-opted into the digital world. There's
Hmm.
no film.
No.
So what it really translates to is the sensitivity of the sensor.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of like digitally cranking that up. And all of these have a weird effect because I was I was explaining this very topic to another one of our friends that doesn't really shoot at all.
Right.
And so she was like, okay, so, if you dial one thing up, let's say you're opening up the aperture to allow in more light, but then you're cutting down the shutter speed to allow in less light. So aren't those two things just kind of crossing each other out?
A
And
little bit.
sorta,
Sorta.
but it's and all of this does tie to exposure. They all affect the image differently. And going back to my calorie example, it's like trying to bake a pie, and in one hand you have butter, and in the other hand you have sugar. And you're like, well, if I just have the butter and double the sugar, it's even, right? It's not right.
No.
That's going to be really
It's going to be
damn different.
like the lighting is going to be the same, but it's going to be a completely different image for
Exactly.
different reasons.
Completely different. It's like, yeah, so same calories, different pie.
Yeah.
Okay. So, with that in mind, let's go over again aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and how that impacts the image when you go up and down on each one of those.
Okay, sure. So, aperture, if you're letting in more light with the aperture, so it's super big, not as much of the image is going to be in focus. So if you ever see like those, like if you're taking portraits of photos, like obviously it doesn't totally relate to coral, but there's like a nice blurry background in the back. That's because the aperture is super big and is letting in all that light and making the background really blurry. Vice versa, if it's really small, a lot more of the image is going to be in focus.
Yeah.
So that's what I tend to shoot on when I'm doing coral. I'm usually they're measured in what's called f-stop, so I'm shooting in like f14 to 16 usually, and that gets a lot of the coral in focus because that's what we want. But that cuts down on a lot of light. So
And we're already struggling with light.
exactly.
Yeah.
So a good way to balance that is shutter speed usually. I normally shoot with a tripod so that I can get really low shutter speeds because if you have a lower shutter speed to let in more light, you're more prone to motion blur. So either that's from like holding your camera, even if you think you're holding your camera as still as can be, if you have a really low shutter speed, that image is going to look blurry. I promise you. It's going to be a little bit of a jitter in there. It's not going to be as crisp as if it would be on a tripod. So, and that also goes into play with coral. If you're shooting like a Goniapora, for example, or a torch, and you want to get that image crisp, if you have a really low shutter speed, there's going to be a lot of motion blur from that thing moving back and forth.
Yeah. So even if you're like super steady, the subject itself is moving around.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I guess like if we don't do a lot of fish photography,
Hmm.
but that's also a situation where shutter speed is king, because if you're shooting a fast moving object and you're trying to capture basically this freaked out tang, that's good that you basically have to have very fast shutter speeds. And again, that's not allowing in a lot of light, and you're going to run into those issues all over again. So it's like I need to stop motion on this animal, but there's
Yeah,
not enough
it's
light.
really about when it comes to that like holy trinity of light. It really comes down to what do you value most in this image. When with fish, it's obviously shooting a fast moving target, so you want that fast shutter speed, and so you're gonna adjust the other two accordingly. Or for my case, a lot of the time when we shoot corals, I want the majority of this thing in focus. So I want to prioritize aperture, and then I'm gonna adjust shutter speed and ISO accordingly. And so it's
Yeah.
like this balancing act between all three things with one key component in mind, maybe two, but there's usually like one that you're really targeting.
Yeah, sacrifices have to be made
Really, yeah.
because unless you just have a monstrously capable camera. Most people don't have monstrously capable cameras. I mean, I think that we're talking like between $5,000 to $8,000 for the
Oh
camera, like
yeah.
that type of stuff.
And
And
even then, like cameras can only really do so much.
yeah, like
You
we
need like a
have
space camera.
We've got great cameras here too,
Oh, we do.
but it's not something that I expect most people just to be able to have access to.
Right.
It sounds like it's overkill, not for professional photography. It's really not. We didn't cover ISO, so if you in trying to get more light, again, this is more like digital.
Right.
This is kind of processing inside the camera. Um, so what does just dialing up the sensor sensitivity do to the image?
Right. So you really don't want to go super ham with the ISO because adding a bunch of I guess digital artifact is whatever is essentially what this stuff is. It's going to make the image look really grainy.
Yeah, how best to describe grain? It's kind of like static.
Static. Yeah, it's like TV static.
It's like TV static, and also it has a weird flattening of the image.
Yeah, you lose a lot of detail in an
Yeah.
image because it's look like if you have a whole bunch of static happening in an image, you can't entirely see what's going on.
Yeah, so you
So,
get like this again this lack of resolution, the introduction of this weird noise, and certain cameras. This is where I think the quality of the camera shines,
mhm,
is because like really good cameras, you can dial up the ISO a lot.
mhm.
But on cheaper cameras, you start to dial up that ISO, and immediately it's potato. Like it goes bad really
Yeah,
fast.
it really does. Yeah. So, if you do have a camera like this, I normally tend to shoot around 1000. And for a camera, we have like the Canon
1000 ISO.
1000 ISO.
Yeah.
And we have the Canon 5 DSR, which is relatively older camera. I think it came out maybe like what, like 7 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah. So,
That's this camera right here.
yeah, this is this camera right here. It's the Canon 5 DSR. Um, so with newer cameras that have come out, it can probably even go higher than that. I mean, you could probably go higher than that with this. I just choose not to. I think the highest I want to go on this camera is around 1600 ISO. Anything other than that, I do tend to start noticing it on my computer screen. But um, newer cameras can probably go higher.
Yeah, I know that some Sonys, for example, don't even blink at 6400 ISO. They don't care.
Yeah, and I've noticed mirrorless cameras tend to do a lot better on in that regard, but that's a whole other conversation.
So let's say that people they don't have a 5 DSR just
Right.
laying around. Uh, there are ways to do this on a phone.
There is. Yeah. It's not going to come out as good, but there are some tips and tricks that you can do to
I
make
mean,
your images
well,
better.
well there's apps though, right? Because I
Right.
think like the default photography app on a phone does not have these controls. But
It has some, but yeah, not a lot.
I guess I'm speaking out of school just because I was like, wait a minute, I don't ever shoot with my phone. What am I talking about? But from everything that I've seen, there's dozens of photo apps that give you manual control now
Hmm.
over ISO, shutter speed, all this stuff.
Right.
So that's something to take into consideration too. Like if the the standard like photo app on your iPhone is not giving you your results, you still might be able to use that same phone.
Hmm.
It's just you need to have a little bit more granular detail so you can make those sacrifices
Right. And
more.
I'm also in the ballpark of like, I also don't shoot with my phone very often when it comes to tanks because I have this camera. So I don't have any app recommendations. However, there are a couple ways that you can get good photos with a phone.
One of the things that just about anybody that's trying to shoot with a phone is going to run into is how blue these tanks are.
Mhm.
It's one thing to have like a professional camera that you can shoot in RAW that, has a much more robust sensor technology, handles color way better. Like for example, the camera that's pointed at Becca, it can compensate so dramatically for blue light that it is basically its own orange filter.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like there's a setting called Kelvin, which is the color temperature, and you can offset it to assume that the light that it's seeing is 15,000 Kelvin. Most cameras top out at 10,000 Kelvin, and that thing goes to 15,000 Kelvin. So it can really bring in so much better color information at those fringes. but phones, not so much. Like my iPhone, for example, complete garbage. Even just pointing it anywhere in in anywhere here,
100%
garbage.
garbage.
So, what is your best solution for that?
So, when it comes to iPhones, I usually end up using a orange filter, and they do make filters for phones. They just clip. Here, let me take the lens cap off. They clip onto the phone over the cameras, and you're able to get a little bit better color from there. But I've also noticed, at least this is on iPhone. I think I have an iPhone 14 Pro, and they do have some like photo filters built in. So I've noticed that a combination of using this filter here and along with if you go to your filters, it's like vivid or vivid cool. It helps with dialing back like that pinkish orange hue that you do get from the orange filter that the camera's kind of compensating for. So it's again another balancing act of of color this time instead of light when it comes to an iPhone.
I hate filters.
I do too. If at all possible, I try my best not to shoot with a filter, just because it just it either messes with your light or messes with your color, and it's not
It's
fun, especially with a phone.
it's like the tool of last resort.
Pretty much.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that they've become so pervasive in the industry. Just whenever you see like on Instagram, just about every photo you see is orange filtered. That
I think people rely on orange filters too much.
exactly. It's become like a standard, not a crutch.
Yeah, it's when you're dealing with orange filters, it can be really easy to now you see all these like bright and pretty colors that your camera hasn't been able to see before. And so you really just want to like crank them up, and that's not the direction you want to go. You want to use this thing as a tool, not a crutch to lean on heavily. Like you want to be
So
able to take a
as a crutch,
as a crutch.
yeah.
Yeah. You want
Well,
to be able to take good photos already, but this is just going to enhance that a little bit.
yeah. Well, I kind of looked at it slightly differently. I was I think it brings a completely unusable photo back from the brink to the point where it kind of is usable. So I get it. Like with my iPhone, there wasn't going to be a situation where I was going to get an image.
That's true. Yeah, with a phone, it's less of a crutch. I was mainly thinking in DSLR land, but
Okay, so for DSLRs, obviously you're not going to be holding up a little phone filter to it.
no.
Uh, so what do we have here?
So that is an 85B filter from Tiffin, I believe, because they make a bunch of different orange hues depending on what you're shooting. Like this isn't specifically made for coral. They didn't make this filter with coral in mind, I don't believe. It just so
No.
happens that it's the right color for getting rid of that specific strain of blue light.
Yeah, because we even tried a bunch of other ones.
We did. We have like a red one. We have maybe another different kind of orange, and we have a yellow. And this is the one that worked out the
Yeah,
best.
there might have been like an amber in there,
Yeah,
but just for future reference, guys, the gold standard is the 85B orange filter.
correct.
Um, when it comes to shooting though with like a DSLR or a mirrorless, I really try to avoid these as much as possible. But there are some times where, in order to show a very specific color, fluorescence, it has to be shot with this,
Yeah,
and
that's kind of the thing.
I kind of hate it.
Yeah.
Kind of hate it.
Yeah, and that's why whenever I do end up taking photos with an orange filter, the adjustments I make to the photo are minimal. I'm not like really saturating this photo to make those colors pop more than they usually do. I'm not altering the colors a bunch more because like, oh, with the orange filter, this color that I don't see with my naked eye comes up in a photo. Oh, I'm gonna make that come out. No, just try and make it as I use it to create an eye visual as much as possible.
Yeah, because these days, most folks they have their tanks for a large portion of the day under like full actinic.
Right.
And and it's like the only way to really get that aesthetic is going to be with an orange filter. Otherwise, it is just going to be a blue blob when it comes to actually shooting on camera. There's a thing in photography where you're trying to like get the cleanest image possible. You're trying to like cut out all of these other things that kind of detract from visual quality. And when you slap an orange filter on it, it's like the most intrusive thing. It makes the image dark. Like again, we're
Yeah.
already struggling with light. That's going to cut down on the light aspect of it. You're jacking up colors all kinds of ways. Like the sensor isn't expecting that kind of wonky light. It is such a like a ham-fisted way to do this, but I at the same time
It's the way you have to do it.
I get it.
There's no other way.
I get it, but boy do I hate it.
Yeah.
And this is us trying to be like delicate with it. I think that there's a lot of photography being kind of like on Instagram and whatnot that is just like s- so ham-fisted.
They're going in.
Yeah, they're going in. I'm like,
Yeah.
Nothing looks like that, you guys."
I think we've gotten some comments being like, oh, I saw this coral online and then I bought it from you guys. Like they saw a picture of it online somewhere else and then they bought it from us because they saw it on our website and they're like, oh, it doesn't look like this other person's photo. I'm like, well, yeah, because the colors are unimaginable.
Yeah, we try to avoid that like crazy
Yeah,
on just within our own website.
for sure. We
But
take it super seriously.
yeah, because that's just such an annoying phone call to get.
Oh, it is. And like there's been a bunch of times where like I take photos of coral, I'm editing them. I'm going up and down the stairs like one, two, three times because I have to double check like does this color look more like this or like this? And so it just and
Yeah.
there's also the issue of just everyone's screens are different and that's hard to compensate for, but I try my best.
True. Speaking of screens, there was a really funny instance. Somebody was like had purchased a coral, uh, and they were shopping like basically on their big screen TV, and were surprised when they got the coral that it was smaller.
No.
Yeah. And
What?
they were, and I was like, dude, we have the sizes of the corals written on the website. It'll be this many inches, this many polyps within that general guideline. Just because you saw it on a bigger screen should not give you the impression
We need to
that
have
the
like a
coral's larger.
blinking warning label being like, hey, this isn't the size as, as it is on your phone screen. It's like what they have to put on
Objects in mirror are smaller or
they
closer than they
it's
appear or
what they have
something.
to put on like boxes of Cheez-Its when they have like photo is enlarged to show
Oh my gosh.
to show detail.
And like conversely, it's like if this guy had pulled it up on his phone, he would have expected it to be smaller.
I
Like,
don't know.
dude,
I
come
don't
on,
know,
guys,
man.
do better,
Get better.
get better. But no, like, again, when it comes to like trying to get um, visual accuracy, it can be so difficult. And one thing that we struggle with, this is like not exactly a photo thing, but there we have like four different orange hammers or something.
Mhm.
And guys, in person, they are barely different. They are different. And when you line up all four of them, sure enough, you can say, okay, yeah, this is different than this, different than this, different than this. It is really challenging to take the picture and have them show up differently.
Oh yeah.
So we run into the issue of, do we just make this all one item
Mm.
and just sell it as the orange hammer? Or do we sell it as four distinct hammers, even though like visually they are so close? Because what also tends to happen every now and again, we'll have somebody say, it's not exactly the same kind of orange hue that you showed in your picture. And it's like, well, technically, there's four different ones that it could be,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it's like, do we make four items that are almost the same? Or do we make one item that's going to have some variation to it?
Right.
And that's so challenging. And sometimes, like when we are looking at what you see is what you get photos, sometimes that what you see is what you get of like a copper tone hammer
Mhm.
looks it looks like one of these other hammers.
Right.
Yeah, it's so difficult sometimes to
And
like nail down.
sometimes we just have to completely reshoot photos because like sometimes we have a what you see is what you get on the website for so long that like
It
corals
changes.
change color. And
Yeah.
that's like neither for like bad or for worse sometimes. It's just it happens. And so I have to go in and like, all right, no, this didn't sell for a while. I got to reshoot it again.
Yeah, that's certain corals. They change color quite a lot,
Yeah.
and so we just basically have to have like a little egg timer on these things. It's like, okay, yeah, it's been a little while. Does it still look like that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Earlier, we had talked about reflection. Um, I've got a couple of thoughts on that, but typically, I think that reflection comes into play more when you're like taking a full tank shot, not necessarily like up close on a specific coral.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have some tips and tricks on people that are struggling with reflection?
Yeah. So reflection usually ends up happening when there is just like scattered light around you and around the tank. So just kind of minimizing the light in the room. Again, we're already working with low light. You probably don't want to do that, but like it'll probably help. Also, getting a polarizing filter for your camera if you're working with. I don't know if they make them for phones.
Yeah. Back in college, I used to work as an intern at NASA
Wow.
in like a laser optics lab, and they made me learn about a lot of this stuff, specific about polarization and
Hmm.
stuff. Okay, guys, this was supposed to be a little bit easy. This is hard mode now. So there's something called first order and second order and third order scattering of light. So first order would be like when you're looking at a reflection and you can clearly see what that thing is a reflection of. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's a lamp. Oh, that's a such and such.
That's me in my tank, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a first order reflection. A second order reflection is when like the light starts to like get diffused or scatters, and that shows up as a haze. And that's a much more difficult scattering to handle. That's where it's better just to turn off the light. But in that first order scattering, that's where a polarizer really helps.
Right.
It's because light is polarized, and it's polarized on two axes, like 90 degrees. And that's why the circular polarizer, it's like you just turn it 90 degrees and you'll get the entire range of that cutting out effect of
Hmm.
that filtering.
Well, there you go. I don't
Yeah.
know how many of you signed up for that little tidbit of information when you clicked on this video, but there you go.
It's like, I know about this. I know about this. But it doesn't do a whole lot for like second order scattering. But that is a super helpful tool. Can you think of like a major downside to a polarizing filter?
I don't like using polarizing filters because it makes things darker. I only use them if absolutely necessary. If there is a reflection happening directly in front of me that's really annoying, then I'll put it on. But otherwise,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. But again, it is a tool. All of these things come at you're sacrificing something to fix these issues with lighting and with like with artifacts. Like,
Hmm.
but it is possible to do.
Yeah.
And again, it's like this kind of translates also to like if you are out and about and you're like looking into like a koi pond or something, you can make all that surface reflection go away. And you're outdoors, you're in basically 2000 par lighting out in a garden.
Yeah.
You're fine. You're
Yeah.
fine. Slap that polarizing filter on, and you're good.
Yeah. Outdoors, great. In your basement, probably not the best.
Yeah. You're gonna struggle.
Yeah.
Or you have a monster camera, one of the two. Let's talk a little bit about editing. Um, editing hot take. Sometimes I see on discussion forums and on anywhere where people are posting images, they'll say like, this came unprocessed straight out of the camera. It is literally impossible. So this camera here, any camera, it's a digital camera, but it's not really a digital device. It is an analog device that takes that information and dumps it into buckets of ones and zeros.
Mhm.
So its image file is literally invisible to human eyes because it is just digital. It's zeros and ones. And then that has to be processed into an image that you can see.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting way of looking at that then.
Yeah. Literally, if you can see it, it's been processed. It's either been processed by the camera or it's been processed by a person. And given the choice, I would much rather a human being that has seen what it's supposed to look like try to process that image. But it kind of gets this label of being deceptive if you have edited the image. But in reality, these cameras, again, they're designed to shoot daylight stuff.
Yeah, you're giving the camera I know cameras now are incredible, but you're still kind of giving them too much credit if you think that they can take a perfect photo immediately
Of a blue tank
of a blue tank.
that they're
I
not
can
optimized
like
for.
sometimes I can't even get a good photo of like just out in daylight when I do, like my other stuff, you know? It's like things need to be altered in order for it to look aesthetically pleasing anyway.
Yeah. Uh, so you do some wedding photography, right?
Here and there.
Here and there.
Here and there. It's not my main source of income, but
I,
I do weddings.
every now and again, well, I think that every like wedding photographer gets into it and then gets out of it whenever anything better comes along.
Honestly, it's a great source of money, but it is a stressful job. So if you are a full-time wedding photographer, props to you because I can't do it full time.
Can you imagine not editing wedding photos?
Absolutely not. It's just it would look like a photo that you would take with your phone, and so no, people would want their money back.
Yeah. You need to fix these things.
It takes me, I think for like 1,000 photos, it'll take me a month to edit all of them, and that's me editing photos every day. I mean, granted, I work here at the same time, but it's not like I'm doing this full time. If I did it full time, I could probably cut that time in half. But it
Yeah, it
takes
takes a
so
lot of
much
editing.
intricacies to get these photos exactly how you want them.
Yeah, and and not editing wedding photos is a fireable offense.
Fireable offense, or I'm not making enough money to really justify my time.
Yeah, so I guess my point is editing is really important, especially when you're talking about taking photos of aquariums.
Mhm.
It is just part and parcel to it. Can you think of like some just some really general tips? Because I wish that we could like look at specific photos because we can immediately see problems in any photo. Like, okay,
100%.
yeah, change this, change this, change this.
Hmm.
Let's see what this would look like.
Right.
But across the board, what are like some general things that people can try to improve their photos on the editing end?
On the editing end, so right off the bat, I don't do a lot of editing in Photoshop. A lot of my editing does come from Lightroom. So if you do use Lightroom to edit your photos, you'll know what I'm
And
talking
also just
about.
assume that people just might have like an app on their phone.
That's also, oh yeah, that's also true. Editing apps are a thing.
Yeah.
But I when so you were talking about like that second layer of like reflection, right?
Yeah.
So
Scattering.
that scattering, it happens a lot with photos that you take because of like you're shooting through glass and water, and
There's
that's just something
stuff
that's
in the
just gonna
water.
happen.
Yeah.
And so on in Lightroom at least, they have a dehaze slider to make it look less flat and hazy. So I use that sometimes minimally, sometimes I crank that up depending on how much scattering is happening in an image. And it helps out a lot when it comes to reef photography. And similarly, the clarity slider does it it doesn't sharpen an image, but it does make it look a little sharper.
Like a little
I
more
don't know.
contrasty and punchy.
No, because then that's just contrast. That's just a
Okay.
contrast
Different
slider.
slider.
It's a different slider, and so contrast works more so like heavy on like the lights and the darks on like a blanket
Yeah.
scale. Clarity works more so in like the nooks and crannies, those
Yeah,
areas.
because contrast, you're basically separating the bright brights and the dark darks
Yeah,
to make it less flat looking,
right.
but you're talking about an actual like down to the pixel detail filter.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting. Okay.
So those help out a lot when it comes to editing photos, and then also just I know most editing apps and also like Lightroom and Photoshop, they have like temperature sliders, and those
Hmm.
help out a lot because even when like if I'm shooting with an orange filter with a blue tank, but you still end up with like this weird pinkish orangey hue in parts of the image. So using temperature sliders to make it a little bit more blue, or using a tint slider to make it a little bit more green instead of pink, that'll help neutralize that a little bit. So being able to point out those things in an image, like step back from the image and just look at it and be like, that looks a little blue. Opposite of blue is yellow on a slider, and making it a little bit more yellow, or that looks a little bit pink because of the orange filter. I'm going to make it a little bit more green.
It's super hard to be instructive when it comes to editing like
It's very
that.
subjective.
Yeah, it is super subjective, and it also it the experience of the person doing it is so important because you just don't have the eye for it yet. There's like this, what is that adage in photography? It's like if you have taken 10,000 photos, now you're a professional sort of thing.
I don't think I recall that quote, but I probably.
Yeah, but I have heard that before where it's like, you know what? You want to be a better photographer, shoot 10,000 photos, analyze every single one of them as to like how it could be improved. At the end of that process, you're going to be pretty good.
Mm.
If I had to guess, Becca shoots like 10,000 a month, and she's shot 10,000 a month for now 4 years, specifically here.
Uh-huh.
You've had all your stuff like published in Coral Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
We have licensed footage to the BBC, to other YouTube channels all over the place. And on top of that, people steal our photography all the
They
time,
do. It's so
unlicensed.
funny.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
yeah, you've done this a lot, and you
mm-hmm.
can you can see from a million miles away something's wrong. And I think that a lot of times, just having to go through that process of taking these pictures and really critically analyzing them over time, you'll see these like patterns start to form where it's like, oh, that's just not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just having like a long database of shooting like the same corals over and over and over again, you can kind of see like technique improving.
Right.
And unfortunately, that just does take practice. One thing that is funny though is like because like Becca has shot so much, sometimes we'll just go through like a rack of certain corals, and everything just looks off. And I just sit there and I just like I look at it and I look at it and like absolutely not. There's no way. There's no way. There's something wrong with the camera. It's like this girl just didn't forget how to shoot suddenly. What the heck is wrong with the device?
And honest, and it has happened where it was just a device.
Yeah,
It
it's like
was just the camera that was being
yeah,
goofy.
it's like which camera is this? Because we need to send it back in for servicing or something.
Yeah.
Because something is wrong.
Yeah, no, it was it was filming with the film cameras. We had gotten a new camera, and we had forgotten to adjust the settings in camera to make the blacks a little bit darker and make the colors pop a little bit like in camera while it's shooting.
Yeah, because it was like
It was a C70.
yeah, because our original camera, we had it for so long, and I totally forgot that I made a custom profile just to shoot our tanks.
Hmm.
And this new camera, we didn't mess with, we were just shooting it straight out of the box like that.
Yeah.
And it just didn't look right. I was
Yeah, and
like,
this camera, it didn't have like a viewfinder, so I was just looking at it through like the LCD screen, and on the LCD screen, like the coloring's a bit different because you're dealing with like LED lights versus like what's in front of you. So like it looked okay there, but when it would pop up on the screen, I felt like I was getting gaslit by a camera. Like I thought it was me for a little bit. I'm like, how am I messing this up? It looks horrible.
turns out
I'm
no.
gonna get fired.
Turns out no. It wasn't you. I guess we could touch on that for just for a sec. But the difference in monitors and phones and whatever the heck you're looking at,
Yep.
really damn different.
Yep. It's it's an issue here as well as in like my freelance photography business, but um we haven't had a whole lot of issues here because like the screen that I edit on my Mac is very similar to like iPhones where people are doing a lot of their online shopping. Every now and then we'll run into an issue because like Luke, who puts the photos on the website, his screen is different than mine. So he'll think like, "Oh, this photo looks different on my screen. You should edit this." And I'm actually like, "No, it actually looks fine here," or something like that, and we have to talk about that. But I know that so when I edit at home, I have two different monitors on my desk. One completely professionally color calibrated. It's a 4K screen. It's fantastic for editing photos, but most iPhone screens and computer screens don't look like that. They do not have access to those kinds of colors, and so when I edit a photo on that screen and I put it on an iPhone, it looks bland and dingy. A lot of that color information is lost. So it's really funny because I bought this computer screen to edit photos, but I have to edit on my gross monitor that I got from somebody because that's how I'm going to get the photo that people are going to be looking at more. So it's really wonky.
It's super tough. And I'll throw one extra little wrinkle in there.
Yeah.
Most of this hobby uh, are men. It's like over 90% male. And we have a very high rate of color blindness. So,
Imagine if that's how you found out you were colorblind. You're like this coral looks different. It's like, well, no, actually.
so guys, just like, go online and take a color blindness test. You might be that guy. It is very common.
I didn't even think about that. That's funny.
Yeah. Just saying. Not that women can't be colorblind.
It's just more rare.
It's more common in men, and men are more common in this hobby. So just saying, guys. Because this is a funny thing. I whenever we have like an argument with like a new staff member about color, I was like, come over here, we're taking the test. It's like, how much do I actually have to listen to you about this?
Have we found out if anybody at the office is kind of
Um,
colorblind?
Not lately, but definitely I made Ben do it. It looks like these different rainbows,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all slightly different rainbows, and you have to line it up to make it like a smooth gradient,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see what kind of colorblind people are.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun exercise.
I like that.
Because
Interesting.
it was getting to the point where like I'm so tired of talking about colors with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Are you actually colorblind?
Mm-hmm.
Take this test. All right, guys, that pretty much does it from here. If you guys have any specific questions about photography or videography that we just didn't cover on the podcast, please feel free to toss it into the comments below. Thanks, Becca, for joining us on camera for the first time in forever.
Forever. There'll hopefully be more of me. I'm not sure yet.
We'll see.
We'll see. You
We'll
might get
see.
lucky.
All right, guys, take care. Happy reefing.
Happy reefing.